welcome to our first book discussion for our Story Seekers Book Club. The book that we are beginning with this month in July of 2024 is An Old-Fashioned Girl by Louisa May Alcott. So I am going to talk a little bit about this, how far I am in the book, and all of that, some things that I've enjoyed so far, and I'll read some quotes that I like as well. And then I chose one bookish habit or practice to focus on each month as we go throughout the rest of the year. And this month's bookish habit is keeping a commonplace book. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well and why I wanted to focus on that habit right now. All right, so we can talk about the book first, I suppose. This is the third Louisa May Alcott book that I have read. I have previously read Little Women multiple times, and then I've read Little Men as well. And, oh no, I'm sorry. This is the fourth book. I just recently, a few months ago, I read a shorter novel of hers called The Inheritance, and I really enjoyed that one. This one is proving to be just as delightful as the others. I have so enjoyed all of the characters. I feel like Louisa May Alcott does a really good job immersing you in her story through setting, and you just feel like you're there. She does such a good job capturing little moments of everyday life and things that make the setting seem more real, I guess. And that's something that I really have looked forward to, or that's something that I was looking forward to in this book, because that has been the case for the other books of hers that I have read. I have to go check on my kids. Hang on just a second. So this is the story of a young woman named Polly, or a young girl named Polly, rather. In the book, I don't know if it actually gives her age, but I want to say she's probably around like 12 or 13 at the beginning of the book. The first, let me see here, the first 7 chapters, I think, the first 6 chapters are of her, and she goes to stay with, I think, I must have missed it at the beginning. She goes to stay with a different family, and she is from the country, and she's very just simple and plain. She doesn't view herself that way, but the family that she goes to stay with does view her that way, and she just has a lot of adjustments to make. So there are some things that come about, like her clothes or her shoes, her manners, different things. They will call her old-fashioned or countrified. The 7th chapter is titled Goodbye, and I read just a little bit of it to find out that she is going to be leaving this family. I don't know why, other than that she's just going back home. I don't know any other details than that. But so far this has been a lovely story. And just watching Polly kind of adapt to some of the things that she's been thrown into, and the kindness that she has shared and shown with the family that she's living with, and kind of how she has changed them a bit, has been very sweet as well. So I did write down a few quotes. I don't have very many. I could have written down way more, but I did kind of have to just choose some favorites. But I do have a few here that I'm going to read to you, and then we will talk about keeping a commonplace book. So the first one is, "I'm used to good manners, though I do live in the country," replied Polly. So at this part of the story, the young woman who is nearest her age, Fanny is her name, and I'm not sure, I don't think it really gives their ages, but I get the idea that she's probably like 13 or 14, but she thinks that she's like 17 or 18, and so Polly just seems a bit, I don't know if backward is the right term, but she just, yes, countrified, old-fashioned. Fanny views Polly as just, pretty simple. And Polly here is basically telling her, like, well, just because I'm from the country does not mean that we don't, have good manners there. And to watch Polly defend her more humble upbringing has been nice and sweet as well. I've enjoyed that part. The next one is, The thought that, insignificant as she was, she might yet do some good, made her very careful of her acts and words, and so anxious to keep her heart contented and face happy, that she forgot her clothes and made others do the same. So this is a bit of a similar instance, and Polly she's not trying to make herself known because of her outward appearances, her clothes, her shoes, her hair, all of that, but just by her kindness and her good manners and the things that really matter like that. It is very pleasant to be loved and admired, very sweet to think we shall be missed and mourned when we die, and Tom was seized with a sudden desire to imitate this boy who hadn't done anything wonderful, yet was so dear to his sister that she cried for him a whole year after he was dead. So in this part of the story, Polly is recounting the death of her older brother that she was very close with. Jimmy was his name, and she is telling it to Fanny's younger brother, Tom. And Fanny and Tom do not get along at all. And Tom is the only boy in the house. His dad doesn't really treat him the greatest. His mom doesn't really treat him the greatest. He's just kind of a troublemaker. And as Polly was telling the story of how her brother died and of how dear he was to her and how close they were, it really made Tom kind of reflect on his own life. And you can see after that some changes that he made to himself just with his character and all of that, you know, this story had a lot of bearing on that. He definitely realized, you know, that if something had happened to him, and there is an accident in the book where he's fine, he's totally okay, but he does have a recovery time. And so I think, like, you know, in my mind, if these were real people, he would probably look back on that incident, the accident that he had, and, you know, it would just kind of be a wake-up call, I guess. So the last quote that I'm going to share is a fairly long one, and this is something that I just read this morning, and it has stuck with me, and I have already been prodded by it multiple times this morning with dealing with my children. One of the main themes in the book so far is the difference in the homes. So the difference in Polly's home, that's, you know, more modest and humble, and you know, they're not, I don't think that they're necessarily poor, but they live in the country, and you just get this like small, quaint country home sort of vibe from when she's talking about her home and her family compared to the large house that Fanny and Tom and their family lives in the city, where they're surrounded by, you know, friends and the theater and shopping and all of this. So just the contrast there has been very interesting. So this, like I said, I just read this morning, and this was a really sweet part of the story. So I wanted to share it with you. Then the thought had come to Polly that the velvet cloak didn't cover a right motherly heart, that the fretful face under the nodding purple plumes was not a tender motherly face, and that the hands in the delicate primrose gloves had put away something very sweet and precious. She thought of another woman, whose dress never was too fine for little wet cheeks to lie against, or loving little arms to press, whose face, in spite of many lines and the gray hairs above it, was never sour or unsympathetic when children's eyes turned towards it, and whose hands never were too busy, too full, or too nice to welcome and serve the little sons and daughters who freely brought their small hopes and fears, sins and sorrows to her, who dealt with it justice and mercy with such wise love. Ah, that's a mother, thought Polly. So in this instance, the last sibling in the family, Maud is her name. Last sibling, is that what I said? the youngest sibling, the youngest sister. She goes to her mother, who has just come in from being with friends, and she's wearing like this, you know, really pretty outfit and a velvet cloak, and Maud goes to her to tell her something, and she goes to put her hands on her mother's dress, and her mother reprimands her and says, "Don't, you're going to get me dirty, don't do that." And it just makes Polly reflect on her own mother and how kind her own mother was, and how ready she always was to to be there for her children. And, you know, she didn't put things above the feelings and the emotions of her children. So those were the quotes that I have written down in my commonplace book. I have really enjoyed An Old-Fashioned Girl so much. It's one of those books I want to keep reading it. It has me captured in so many ways. But at the same time, I know that the sooner I, get to the end, the sooner it will be over, and I don't want that to happen either. So it feels like a bit of a conundrum, but I'm going to continue reading it. It probably will only take me a few days to finish it. I probably will try to stretch it out like over the next week, just because I am enjoying it so much. And it's also one of those books that, sometimes when you read a book for the first time and you get to the ending of it and you have this feeling of mourning that you can't read it for the first time ever again. Of course, that's the case with any book you read. You can't read it for the first time ever again. But there are only some books that really, that sticks out in my mind. And Little Women is one of those. And I think An Old-Fashioned Girl is going to be one of those as well. So I am looking forward to getting more into this story. Polly grows up. So the next chapter, like I mentioned, was titled Goodbye. And then the chapter after that, chapter 8, chapter 8 is titled 6 Years Afterward. So there must be quite a span there. And I don't know, that's chapter 8, only halfway through. So I'm about a third of the way through the book, and I am not sure what the next part is going to hold. But that is all for the book. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about keeping a commonplace book. Okay, so I love the idea of keeping a commonplace book. This, several years ago, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, when I started getting into reading about Charlotte Mason and her educational philosophy, that was really when I started coming across the idea of a commonplace book. But I had also heard about it like years ago as a child myself. And I know that I did here and there write down little quotes from books that I enjoyed. I've always been a reader, but those, I don't know whatever happened to those scraps of paper. They probably weren't even in notebooks. And I did used to write down like Bible verses and things as I was reading, my Bible for daily devotions or something like that. But I've never been consistent at keeping a commonplace book. And this is something that I want to cultivate in my own life, a habit I want to cultivate for my own good, but also because it's something that I want my children to do. And I want them to see me doing it, and then, hopefully that will spur them to have the desire to do that themselves as well. There are so many instances of commonplace books. So many famous authors and poets kept commonplace books. Politicians, like the Founding Fathers, they kept commonplace books. Thomas Jefferson there's quite a few quotes actually from Thomas Jefferson about keeping commonplace books. I read a book about James Madison last year, and he mentions keeping a commonplace book. So this is not like a new idea, a recent idea at all. This has been around for hundreds, probably thousands of years. I did find 2 quotes online that I wanted to read to you about keeping a commonplace book. The first one is from the British Critic in February of 1794. And it says, "No man engaged in literary occupations ought to be without the advantage of a commonplace book, which may serve as the register of his sentiments, resulting either from the exploring activity of a contemplative mind, the energy of superior genius, or investigations of a scientific nature." So a commonplace book, it can be so many things. And I know I've seen some people where they'll keep a commonplace book for fiction, they'll keep a commonplace book for nonfiction, or I think like especially something that I'm really drawn to is I like to read specific specific, what would you call that? Like specific subjects amongst nonfiction. So, you know, something like homeschooling. I could keep a commonplace book just for homeschooling book quotes. Or natural health is something that I'm really interested in. So I could keep a commonplace book just for those quotes. So there are so many ways that you can do it. Everyone has theirs organized differently, I think. And one of the things that has kept me from being consistent is just not being exactly sure how to organize it. So I think what I'm currently going to do is I'm going to work on just commonplacing one book at a time. I don't want to overwhelm myself. I don't want to, you know, bite off more than I can chew, but to learn to cultivate this habit, I am going to, right now, I'm going to be just commonplacing for an old-fashioned girl. So when I find a quote I like, I will write it down in my notebook, and once this book is finished, I will choose another book to keep quotes from. I know some people will do multiple books at a time, so they'll use different highlighters, so they'll write and then, you know, highlight, and they'll keep track of which color goes with which book. Some people will just do, you know, keep track of the quotes with like sticky tabs or something while they're reading a book, and then they'll go back and commonplace all at once the book is finished, and then have all the quotes together and, you know, in one section, and then the next book in one section. I have tried that, and I liked that method, but it wasn't sustainable because I just got tired of writing. So then I just found myself not writing anything. So this is what I'm going to try right now. I do have one other quote to share with you. This is by Jonathan Swift, who is an author, or was an author. He wrote Gulliver's Travels, among other things. But the quote I found from him was, "A commonplace book is what a provident poet cannot subsist without, as great wits have short memories. A book of this sort is in the nature of a supplemental memory. There you enter not only your own original thoughts, which 100 to 1 are few and insignificant, but of other men." So that last part just kind of made me chuckle a little bit. There you enter not only your own original thoughts, which 100 to 1 are few and insignificant, but of other men. So like I said, it made me chuckle a little bit. I kind of thought it was funny, but it did also bring to mind, you know, the fact that generations and years of writing and thinking are built upon the last one. And if we don't record what we are reading and thinking our thoughts about what we're reading, then what is the next generation, you know, what are they going to have to look back on to build the next step on that foundation? You know, we have so many writings and thoughts and letters and just a plethora of ideas that were written down in past generations, and whether we realize it or not, whether we like it or not, that is what we are building on to an extent today. And if, you know, if that is just lost in our generation, what is the next generation going to have to look back onto? So those were just a few of my thoughts about commonplacing. I will probably go ahead and write them in my book just so that I don't lose them. I have them just kind of scribbled on a piece of paper here in front of me. So thank you very much for being here with me today. I am excited to finish An Old-Fashioned Girl and to continue writing down some commonplace quotes, things that I want to remember from the story. And then at the end of the month, I will be sharing a wrap-up of the book, a wrap-up of my thoughts about commonplacing, and we will talk about the next book that we're going to read together. It makes me happy to have this little corner of the internet where I can share books with you, and I hope that you will continue along the journey with me of seeking stories. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.